After the recent release of DC's latest Absolute Universe series, and the even more recent video by a friend of the channel, DanBoyWonder, where he covers his pitch for an Absolute Universe version of Ben 10, I wanted to give my own take on the topic. If you're unfamiliar with the Absolute series of comics, it's a universe where you've got a version of Batman that isn't a 6'2" billionaire Bruce Wayne, but instead he's a 6'6" absolute mountain of a man, big unit engineer. And in this universe, you've got a Superman who came to Earth as an adult rather than as an infant. And this really great version of Wonder Woman who was raised in hell rather than being raised in Themyscira. I know there are upcoming stories with the Flash and Martian Manhunter, which I'm quite looking forward to, but at the time of recording this video, haven't come out yet. So rather than working out how Ben would fit into this Absolute Universe, since Dan already did that, I wanted to get into how an Absolute Kevin would work. So if you haven't gathered it already, the Absolute Universe follows the same characters with one core element changed, leaving to them following a rather different path. We start off with a young Kevin sitting in the back of his father's truck, seeing trees go by in the reflection of the car's window. For the sake of this story, we'll have this be an older, grizzled version of Kevin's father, Devon, who in this timeline survived the conflict with Ragnarok. And from that, Devon carries some serious survivor's guilt in this timeline, Grandpa Max being the one who didn't make it out this time. So for my Absolute Kevin 11, the dramatic change comes from which father figure survived. So rather than Grandpa Max returning to Earth and being part of his grandchildren's lives, you had Devon returning home to his son. Back to it though, we have a young Kevin and his parents setting up camp at the Yosemite National Park. Devon making it clear that after the accident, he needs some time to reconnect and appreciate everything he has, particularly his family. We've got this young Kevin who started to show signs of being a bit of a troublemaker, already coming to blows with the street toughs we meet in the classic series. He sort of encountered them, but at this point they're not sort of full-blown enemies. We get to see Devon scolding Kevin for becoming such a delinquent at such a young age. There's a level of tenderness and remorse that comes after he's spoken to Kevin, but he's really reaching for anything he can do within his power to regain that sort of sense of control after what happened to Max. From this, Kevin storms off into the woods. Quite predictably, the Omnitrix comes crashing down, creating the same crater in the ground, leading Kevin to take a look the same way Ben did. Only this time, there's a green spark of electricity when Kevin reaches towards the Omnitrix, leaving it to lose power and remain still. Kevin then pockets the inactive Omnitrix and takes it with him. Making his way back to camp, he starts to lose control of his breathing. At this point, the only thing he can hear is his heartbeat. He starts getting flashes of him fighting the street toughs, cutting in and out between the conflict between his father, Ragnarok, and finally, a glimpse of Grandpa Max's sacrifice. And suddenly we get the transformation sequence. Kevin lets out the classic scream as he transforms into his amalgam form. But in this timeline, in line with the Absolute series, the amalgam form is much larger, much more ferocious looking, with a more exaggerated jaw and more of a comparable size to a base humongousaur. He starts panicking, he taps into his Pyronite abilities and burns down the forest. We cut to a Devon running through the inferno, screaming for his son, risking his own life in search for Kevin. Things sort of settle down as the forest burns to a crisp, and amalgam Kevin sitting on his knees slumped forward, completely overwhelmed by what's happened. Devon spots Kevin's amalgam form in the distance, not quite realising who or what that is, receiving a message from his plumber communicator, as it's revealed a squad of plumbers has surrounded Kevin, armed to the teeth with weaponry. As Devon approaches, he asks the unrecognisable amalgam Kevin something along the lines of, "What have you done with my son?" And that's where we'll end issue 1 of this story. From there, I can see Devon working out that it was Kevin relatively quickly, initially being in disbelief that his son could do such a thing, after being raised as an Osmosian, knowing that if they were ever to absorb too much energy, that caused them to go insane. So he's sort of going, why would my son ever do this? Have I not taught him this? I've raised him too much like an earthling and a human rather than an Osmosian. I can see Devon having some internalized issues with this, being raised in a culture looked down upon power-hungry Osmosians. Then you'd spend some time with Devon and Kevin sort of battling Devon's preconceptions on the overconsumption of energy, which causes a rift between him and Kevin to form. Initially blaming Kevin as if it was his intention to take on all the energy in the Omnitrix. After initially being captured by the plumbers, I can see the story following a bit of a Generator Rex path, with Kevin being the plumber's sort of secret weapon in dealing with alien threats. In this universe, the plumbers are much harsher, they're a much different organisation. Not in a villainous way, but a much more overly authoritative way. I'd say the initial antagonist of this series would be Devon. He's not an outright villain, but he's certainly a source of conflict. As far as traditional villains go, I want to focus on characters like Cervantes, Phil, and the Forever King, and anyone who's really a direct villain to the plumbers. And for what I'm sure a lot of you have been wondering about, what would happen to Ben in this timeline? Ben would inevitably be this universe's counterpart to Kevin in the reverse roles of the main timeline. This what-if version of Ben was raised without the influence of Grandpa Max, but knowing his sacrifice. Becoming a plumber with the pedigree of being Grandpa Max's grandson, and fully applying himself, becoming an absolute prime example of what a plumber should be, really putting to work all the intelligence you see in Ben without as many goofy elements, which ends up creating a rivalry between himself and Kevin, eventuating in Ben managing to essentially reactivate the Omnitrix, becoming an even more capable plumber, constantly one-upping Kevin, causing them to come to blows in a similar way to a Sasuke or Naruto or Goku and Vegeta, but all while remaining on the same side. They're rivals in the truest sense. I want to extend a huge thank you to Dan for the idea of an absolute Ben 10. The way this video nearly wrote itself, and the way Ben 10 so effortlessly blends in with the DC universe made this video such a pleasure to work on. The idea of Kevin being the plumber's secret weapons and the emotional elements of his relationship with his dad and his dad's inner turmoil with Max's death, and even Ben living up to his full potential as a plumber, and then getting the Omnitrix in his teenage years is such a fun idea. If you haven't subscribed, I'd seriously appreciate it, and if you want to go beyond that and share it around, that really helps the channel. Otherwise, I just appreciate you engaging and being here. Thanks for watching.